Так, всем здорово. Сегодня у нас последний стримчик по Left 4 Dead. Комментарии разработчиков. В этом разделе содержатся звуковые комментарии участников команды разработчиков Valve. Для запуска или установки комментария выберите любую иконку зеленого облачка и нажмите кнопку «Использовать». Режим комментария. Вы не сможете зарабатывать достижения, и зараженные вплоть до развязки не будут обращать на вас внимания. Погнали.
Всем, кто меня слышит, направляйтесь в госпиталь милосердия для эвакуации. Повторяю, направляйтесь в госпиталь милосердия.
Hi, my name is Gabe Newell, and welcome to Left 4 Dead. Left 4 Dead is our first attempt to combine the strengths of single-player and multiplayer games. We wanted to take the character-driven storytelling of our single-player games, like Half-Life, and combine it with the social replayability of our multiplayer games, like Counter-Strike and Team Fortress 2.
Это знакомство с
Plus,
Ластом
Left
ты
4 Dead
нажал
has
и
zombie hordes and
знакомился
co-op,
с
so what's
Лафтой.
not to like? To listen to a commentary node,
Yeah.
put your crosshair over the floating commentary symbol and press your use key. To stop a commentary node, put your crosshair over the rotating node and press the use key again.
Блин, а я не помню, я
Some
вот...
commentary nodes may take control of the game in order to show something to you. In these cases, simply press your use key again.
Ладно.
Originally in Left 4 Dead, there were some
We experimented with a variety.
While we were developing bots for Counter-Strike Source, we discovered that a few of us armed to the teeth with automatic weaponry against 30 knife-wielding enemy bots was a lot of fun. After shipping Counter-Strike Source in late 2004, we started experimenting.
We treat the infected horde as a major character in Left 4 Dead and spend a lot of effort in making their movements believable. This
Тут
includes
меня
hundreds
даже
of
никто
motion
не
captured
трогает, в
animations that
принципе.
are algorithmic.
Left 4 Dead requires a variety of areas off the main path.
Блин, я
where
просто
the
если это
infected
все
can
буду
spawn.
слушать,
We learned that once we had created these spaces, players naturally
блин,
wanted to
это
explore
долго
them.
будет.
So fairly late in development, we decided to reward the players for going into these
Так
areas
что я по
by
пути,
allowing the random creation of
типа,
bonus items, such as pain
буду
pills,
это все вот так
molotovs,
вот.
pipe
Я
bombs, and
даже если
extra
не
pistols.
дослушал что-то там. Фишка здоров. А, нет, смотри.
The most common attitude toward music in multiplayer games is that it just gets in the way.
Они
We
все-таки,
wanted the music in Left
когда
4
я без
Dead to heighten the
комментариев, на
key emotional
меня
elements that should be inherent in a horror
можно
game.
с тобой
Keeping
поиграть.
in mind that everything in a game should
Ну,
contribute to gameplay.
блин, в этот режим
Therefore, we made
нельзя.
a simple set
Он
of goals
только
that the
соло.
music should meet to keep people from.
Once the game is in a playable state, we bring in
Этот режим
friends and
только
family who've
соло.
never played the game to playtest specific areas, maps, or campaigns. These players bring a fresh perspective and objectivity to the game experience that often gives us new insights into what's working and what's not in our games. We observe their play and experience their exhilarations and frustrations. While playing, we encourage them to talk and ask questions to get a better idea of what they're thinking, though we let them know that we won't be able to answer any of those questions or offer any help. Watching these playtests helps us to tune the game so that the first-time players understand the
Я
game
ничего не
mechanics
пропустил.
and the basic premise for how the game is played, and that we're achieving the right balance of challenges and rewards. After the play session is complete, there's a final Q&A session where we ask them.
The designs of the boss
Ёб
infected
моя.
were driven directly from weaknesses observed during our daily playtesting.
The Screamer was a boss zombie who didn't have any actual attacks. He was bound in a straitjacket. You knew when he was around because of his crazed, maniacal cackling. The trick to the Screamer was that if he saw you, you had a moment to kill him before he ran away. And once the Screamer got away from the survivors to a high.
To overcome the horror and darkness of Left 4 Dead, our highest priority was to create 4 believable people for the survivors, which you could connect with. With the design of Francis, we were looking for a large
To find a coherent visual look for Left 4 Dead, we first had to make choices that would help enhance gameplay.
When we started what was to become Left 4 Dead in late 2004, or Terror Strike as it was known at the time, our team was quite small. However, we knew we had certain strengths, one of them being AI. AI is just shorthand for software that results in apparently intelligent behavior, which can take many different forms. In our case, we wanted to explore procedural content generation, creating an AI algorithm that would generate endless amounts of content for players to consume. The advantages of this are many. Not only would the game be infinitely replayable, but we could theoretically create...
Local contrast adjustment is another film effect we've implemented in Left 4 Dead. We control contrast dynamically keyed to peak events in the game. When everything suddenly gets sharper, this is a visual parallel to an adrenaline rush. We use contrast to emulate a heightened sense of awareness. While players may not be consciously aware of these effects, they eventually come to associate subtle changes in visual presentation with shifts in the game's intensity.
Не открывается, да?
Anyone designing a post-apocalyptic city has to deal with the problem of how to light it. Initially, our take on it was that the city still had power. You could see lights in many windows and the streetlights were all lit up. It didn't give us the atmosphere we wanted, but we felt we needed those light sources. When we started to unify the art and lighting design, one of the decisions was to eliminate a lot of lights. This gave us an opportunity to come up with other ways of bringing light into scenes. As we removed lights, we found we were also removing any sense of normality in the city. Without lit windows, or even the illuminated signage in front of stores, we removed some familiarity from the player's experience. Things are lit from lower angles than they would expect, from car headlights and oil barrel fires. These dramatic angles really enhance the sense of a creepy, desolate, almost hopeless environment. Now it's a city that you've seen, but not in a way that you've ever seen it before. Something's amiss. Something's off.
Car alarms are an example of what we call panic.
Buildings by nature tend to be pretty square, and if there's a well-lit building with a dark sky behind it, you clearly see the squareness of the building, no matter how many AC units, chimneys, or other interesting shapes are stuck on top of it. So what we did here was flip the typical lighting scheme and put a bright sky behind dark buildings. Suddenly,
early versions of Left 4 Dead allowed more skillful players to run off on their own without much fear of deadly consequences, bobbing and weaving around the infected before they could react. The addition of player slowdown when hit by a common infected severely reduced the player's ability to simply run straight through the horde. More importantly, the Hunter Pounce and Smoker Hang presented fatal situations.
Through playtesting, we found that Left 4 Dead's unique cooperation mechanics were tricky even for seasoned gamers to grasp immediately. Failing because of rules that are not clear is never fun. Therefore, we designed the game instructor system to educate players as quickly as possible. Because first-time players can potentially join an in-progress game at any point, it was critical that the game instructor dynamically interpret game events. It keeps a running list of the lessons that can be taught in the current context and displays the ones that are most important. It also tracks how many times the player has successfully demonstrated that they've learned the lesson. Once the player has proven competence at any specific lesson, the hint is never shown again.
То есть на меня им пофиг, а на моих тиммейтов нет, я понял.
Left 4 Dead evolved some of the contextual dialogue
подумал,
technology that
это
we used
ведьма.
in the orange box. Each survivor has a large database of lines to choose from based on their present activity and a variety of factors, such as their health, stress level, kinds of special infected seen so far, and many others. Each line can potentially trigger an automatic response from another character, allowing rich conversations to be dynamically generated based on the...
Another way we try and give players a new experience every time they play Left 4 Dead is that in addition to randomly placing bonus items like pain pills and pipe bombs, we vary the location of the more powerful weapons: the auto shotgun, the assault rifle, and the hunting rifle. These weapons will always appear somewhere in the main path, but there are 4 different areas in the subway station where they can spawn. This means that players can't take these positions for granted on repeated playthroughs, and must keep their eyes open for the weapon upgrades.
Надо просто каждый угол осматривать, потому что тут могут в любом месте запрятать эти комментарии.
Although it sounds ridiculous to talk about advanced zombie AI, we spent a great deal of time on the AI systems for the common horde.
Эти субтитры полэкрана мне закрывают.
The environments in Left 4 Dead are geometrically complex and littered with breakable and movable objects. One of the design goals for the zombie horde was that there can never be a place where a survivor can stand that a zombie
Я уже не
cannot
помню
navigate
просто.
to.
Я эту кампанию год
To
назад
make this
проходил.
happen required not only
This covered body is an example of how we tell a story in the levels without using any words or overt storytelling. We wanted to show that there are other people in the world that are survivors like you. We figured most people wouldn't survive very long and you'd come across their bodies, but we needed a way to set these apart from all the dead ragdolls of the common.
Smoking the set is a common film technique used to help separate background and foreground elements. We use particles and distance-based fog to do our own.
Early playtesting revealed that players often didn't know that other survivors were in need of help, even though the status of the other survivors at the bottom of the screen changed to red. When being attacked by a horde of zombies, we found players focusing exclusively on the in-game action and missing any changes to the HUD and the other player's status.
In Left 4 Dead, players carry flashlights to illuminate the environment. These shadow-casting light sources not only add surface richness
типа вообще нет ни
Before there were
танков, ни
rescue closets,
охотников.
survivors who died during the game had to wait until the next checkpoint before they could rejoin. As the game matured, the time between checkpoints reached 10 to 15 minutes, clearly too long for a player to sit in spectator mode. Although it may seem obvious now, it wasn't really clear how to bring dead survivors back into the game in a simple and believable way. Once we hit on the mechanic that you're rescuing a survivor who has barricaded himself in, the problem was solved.
We set out to create an interesting trade-off between the pipe bomb and the Molotov from day one. Given the limit of a single item in your inventory, the choice needs.
At one point in the development process, playtesters told us that with the exception of the finale maps, they found the experience of going through a camp.
Crescendo events were the result of a lot of playtesting. Playtesters really love the finales, but since it can take like an hour or so to get to each one, they were missing these kinds of intense experiences along the way. What playtesters liked most about the finale was that it was the one time they were able to stop, catch a breath, make plans, and set up traps for the infected. During the rest of the campaign, you're always on the run, reacting to the infected and trying to move forward. So these crescendo events came out of wanting to get more of that planning and strategy into the rest of the campaign. These events also helped a bunch with team building. Like the minigun is really important.
Посмотрите, просто на полэкрана субтитры, но это
But the minigunner is really vulnerable. They have a limited angle of view, they can't watch their backs anymore, so they have to depend on their teammates to cover them. With crescendo events on the way to the finale, we not only vary the pacing.
One distinguishing characteristic about Lewis is that he represents the everyday man. While Bill and Francis are characters who obviously live on the outskirts of society, Lewis is really the only one in the group who looks like he's trying to hold on to aspects of normalcy and civilization in a world of utter chaos. Designing a sleek-fitted silhouette and adding detail elements such as designer shoes, necktie, and a designer watch not only distinguishes his character from
надо
the rest
все
of the group,
просмотреть. Может, тут в
but also
туалете
gives
где-то
the player
комментарий.
insight into who Lewis was prior to the apocalypse.
Кто их знает? Блин, ну реально вот на пол экрана комментарии, ну субтитры. Это вообще не прикольно, ни капли. Некомфортно играть. Так, у нас тут экзит.
Usually, each model in the game has its own unique texture maps painted specific.
Lighting was one of our toughest challenges. We had to find a light level that was atmospheric without striking players as frustrating or unfair. Wherever possible, we let lighting tell the story and enhance the gameplay.
Along with the boomer, the tank was one of our earliest bosses. Where the boomer broke the rule of shoot everything that moves, the tank changed the team's tactics to require immediate and direct cooperation.
Но он заспавнился из-за комментария. Из-за комментария он заспавнился, как и там в начале толстяк. А так, я так понимаю, тут нет. Просто обычные заражённые бегают и все.
One difficulty with the tank was that since we offset his incredible toughness by slowing him down.
One of the film techniques we relied on was color correction. Color correction simplifies and unifies the visual palette. Our color correction allows us to set a specific saturation threshold below which everything falls off towards gray, while critical items like health packs and blood stay bright and eye-catching. We also vary color correction by area. For instance, safe rooms have a warm color quality, evoking safety, in distinct contrast to the cooler palettes of the outdoors, which feel cold and forbidding.
На меня им пофиг вообще.
Здесь оружие.
Я на всякий случай чит-меню включил. Ну, я пока что не включил именно неуязвимость. Но на всякий случай, чтобы это вот... Может, я не смогу где-то что-то пройти. У меня зазаду будет. Я включил, типа, бессмертие и прошел спокойно. Тут меня и так никто не трогает. Ну ладно.
Готовы повеселиться?
Так что вот, видите, у меня как бы было 100 в прошлой кампании. Я потом подгорел немножко и все. У меня... Я подгорел немножко, у меня 2 хп вот потерялось. А, тут до сотки не восстанавливается, максимум 99. Типа, когда ты начинаешь кампанию, то у тебя сотка. Но восстановить до сотки нельзя.
However, it became obvious after a few playthroughs that skilled survivors knew exactly where each of these were, killing the atmosphere of anticipation and constant danger. To address this, we tried creating sets of these mob generators and randomizing which sets were active for a given session. This helped somewhat, but ultimately it meant that experienced survivor teams would just have to check a few more known locations. Since a primary design goal of Left 4 Dead was to create an experience that could be replayed indefinitely, we needed a new approach. We decided to go for the idea.
Network bandwidth usage when playing Left 4 Dead is a huge concern. We're constantly looking for ways to reduce how much data the server needs to send to each.
The process behind designing Zoe's character wasn't as straightforward as the other three. Developing a young female in a zombie apocalypse isn't easy with a backstory like hers. She had to be attractive and worn down at the same time. She needed to be tough and able to hold her own, even though she's occasionally terrified. Her readability was also something we had to take into consideration. A bright red jacket solved the problem.
Our first maps created specifically for the game were giant non-linear city sections. The idea was that the survivor team would have to find their way through the zombie-infested city. Playtesting quickly revealed that keeping track of your teammates and fending off the hordes of zombies completely consumed players' attention. Adding on-the-fly discussions of which way to go were slow and frustrating. More importantly, however, was that the teams quickly found their favorite route and tended to always run the same way every time, minimizing their on-the-fly decisions. By paring down the city to a representative and fairly linear route, we could better spend our limited resources making that area.
Originally, the survivor's path forced them through a gas station.
This loading dock was another arena that we designated for our mini finale. This time, instead of locking the survivors in a defensive position, we decided to have them ride the lift up to a rooftop encounter with the horde.
Based on the success of procedurally populating the world with wanderers and mobs, we decided to try to guarantee a consistent dramatic experience for the survivors. Through playtesting, we observed sessions where some survivor teams would occasionally get into a downward spiral of being overwhelmed to the point that they were never able to regroup and get ahead. This was partially due to some poor choices of the survivor players in varying skill levels, but also due to the luck of the draw with the procedural population system.
Кстати, на этой неделе, не знаю, может даже завтра или послезавтра, вот, будет стрим.
To address this, we created a system that tracks each survivor's stress level by watching for events like how much damage are you taking, how many zombies have you killed near you, and so on. If a survivor's stress level gets too high, the system will step in and forcibly throttle back the zombie population system to make sure the team gets a break every now and then. These breaks are critical for a couple of reasons. The primary reason is battle fatigue. Constant fighting and gunfire is tiring. Secondly, the team needs an end to these skirmishes along the way to give them a chance to regroup, heal, and reassess. Lastly, these big exciting battles are only exciting if there are also periods of quiet, creepy, tension, and anticipation to contrast them against. This dramatic pacing is really critical to creating a fun experience. Once this system was in place, we realized we had all this useful information on how the survivor team is actually doing. From a dramatic standpoint, ideally we want to see the survivor team just make it into the next checkpoint, limping in, being chased by the horde, so they can celebrate when the door closes and they yell, "We made it."
One film technique we brought to Left 4 Dead was the idea of grain. Film grain is most apparent in dark scenes, which made it an attractive visual effect for our game. Grain does a good job of implying detail in darkness, adding grittiness and texture. However, we found in playtesting that if we applied grain uniformly, people would quickly tire of the effect. We hit upon a method for dynamically varying the grain effect based on light level. Scenes range from grainy texture in darkness and shadows to no grain at all in the brightest spots.
Left 4 Dead was created with the goal of being replayable. This goal causes a problem for writing, where characters will have the same speech opportunity multiple times over a single session. So we have to avoid having the speech become repetitive. We do that in multiple ways. One is to have almost all the speech have a random element to when it plays. This stops the player from being able to tune out the speech because it is expected for a certain action. We successfully tested this on Team Fortress 2 and have expanded on that system. In Left 4 Dead, not only does the initial speech have a random element, but we also have follow-up lines that may or may not play after the initial line, randomizing the speech opportunity further. We also limit how often some lines play. No matter how witty or funny a line is, you're sick of it the 100th time you hear it in an hour-long play session. To address this, our vocalization system allows us to control the rarity of individual lines or even complete speech opportunities. For instance, a speech opportunity may only fire if you are playing the character Bill and Zoe is healing you and she has just healed you a few minutes earlier. This type of randomization based on combination of criteria help make the speech seem natural and avoid having the player hear it too often.
For much of the development of Left 4 Dead, versus mode was the default and only mode. Balance problems eventually forced us to make it a separate game type. The problem was that if we balanced it to provide the survivors a reasonable chance of escape, the experience was a long and frustrating one for the player zombies. Changes that were necessary to make the player zombie experience satisfying also served to make the experience dramatically harder for the survivors. Separating versus mode allowed us to break out of this dilemma. Rather than aiming for a 50-50 shot at the survivors escaping, now we're aiming for a shorter, more intense experience where the survivors are unlikely to make it to the end. Their goal is simply to get further than the other team did. It's more fun for the zombies, and your reward for having a harder time as the survivors is that you get to switch teams after you're slaughtered and do the same to them.
This ladder, from day one, has always been a really exciting place in the campaign, because it forces the team to separate a bit, and players can't shoot while they're on the ladder. If a team's in great shape, they just fly through this area. But if the team is really hurting, everyone will stop and look at each other to see who has the most health. That guy will generally go up first, because chances are there's going to be infected up there. It's not always the case, but often enough that whoever goes up first is going to take a bit. The witch is much rarer than the boomer, and her penalty is much more severe. Basically, if you shoot the witch, you will likely die. The witch has two functions. One is to provide an exception to the rule of shoot everything that moves. The primary function of the witch, however, is to force a change of pace on the survivor team. Ideally, discovering a witch near your path will result in the team going into stealth mode, shutting off their flashlights and walking carefully around her as to not disturb her. This is a large... Valve has a long history of gathering real-world gameplay data and using that to improve our products. In Left 4 Dead, we automatically gather data from internal playtests and use that to tune the game. We look at every angle, including things like how often survivors help each other, how effective different types of infected are, how effective weapons are, and which weapons players favor. We learn a lot from analyzing gameplay data, and it lets us make decisions based on real information rather than guesswork. We will gather that same gameplay data from our real-world Left 4 Dead players and use that information to continue to improve the game. We'll also share the gameplay data we gather with the community as we do with our other products.
Since killing zombies is such a big part of this game, we invested a lot of time into making their death animations more dramatic than simple ragdolls. We had a professional stuntman on a motion capture stage perform about 100 different dying animations from different kinds of weapons and hit from different directions, like from the front or behind. We then combined these mocap animations with the physics-driven...
We took several steps to keep the music interesting enough that the players would be inclined to keep it on as they play. We keep it changing so it won't become tedious. To this end, we created a music director that runs alongside the AI director, tracking the player's experience rather than their emotional state. We keep the music appropriate to each player's situation and highly personalized. The music engine in Left 4 Dead has a complete client-side multi-track system.
In Left 4 Dead, players are constantly getting attacked by mobs of common infected, and have lots of opportunities to view individual infecteds up close. Playtesters tend to notice and remember the variety of faces and clothing of the different types of common infected, and it helped to reinforce the sense of a vast epidemic. It was a challenge to create this diversity of looks for common infected, and take advantage of unique clothing or uniforms in specific areas without blowing.
The idea that a bad decision by one player directly impacts the whole team is central to the design of Left 4 Dead. It is emotionally very powerful to know that you need your teammates to succeed, and to have clear and visceral feedback that you made a mistake that is going to cost the team dearly. Examples include shooting a boomer that explodes on a friend, causing a horde of zombies to attack him, causing the witch to attack, which usually means someone is going to die, throwing a bad Molotov and burning your friends to a crisp, shooting a car alarm, causing all hell to break loose, running away and leaving your team incapacitated and dying, and of course, shooting your friend in the back as he was limping into the safe house, incapacitating him while the horde is hot on your heels. These kind of actions may not actually end your game, but your friends will certainly let you know just how they feel about them.
Я подумал, это ведьма сидит.
A lot of overreaching dynamic music systems go to great lengths to organize and control a very expressive art form, often to the point of making the results perfectly controlled, but also perfectly boring. Our music director aims for planned serendipity. By designing the music and rule sets to increase the probability of beautiful happenstance and to minimize the probability of inappropriate mistakes, we end up with the highest percentage of musical events working as planned, a nice mid-percentage of acceptably artful mistakes, and very few actual poor moments. If you over-design the music and rule sets, there are no surprises. And without surprises, listeners are quickly bored. Ironically, by keeping things simple, the music seems planned. Greater complexity just leads to greater randomness and many more poor moments.
Чё вы закрыли здесь?
One of our goals when designing the 4 survivors was to have a very diverse group of real-world characters who fit in the post-apocalyptic storyline, but that also have heroic and aspirational qualities. Bill was a challenging design.
The crescendo event centered on this elevator has a very simple mechanic: survive until the elevator arrives. In order to distinguish it from other crescendo events, we added breakable walls that allowed the horde to smash through, surprising the survivors and providing access for them to attack from all directions.
Можно патроны?
Designing the box art for Left 4 Dead was a lengthy process, beginning well over a year before the game shipped. All in all, more than 30 versions of the box art were produced internally, each one exploring different ways to visually communicate about the game. When introducing a new franchise like Left 4 Dead, its box design needs to engage people who are less familiar with the game. At first, we believed that in Left 4 Dead's case, we needed to be very literal, communicating all the important things about the game right there on the box front. We went through many versions of the art featuring 4 human characters working cooperatively as a...
We base the music on what the player is actually experiencing and not on what we want them to experience. Working from artificial life work our audio designers had done on Lord of the Rings and the Matrix sequels, we implemented a simple system to examine what's going on in the player's immediate environment, then added the appropriate reactive scalar rule sets to control the music and its volume levels. Most of the more prominent musical cues are thus reactive results from rule sets processing this input, making the musical experience specific to each player. This system also controls the dynamic mix system, another feature unique to Left 4 Dead.
Another dialogue feature added for Left 4 Dead is the ability for characters to dynamically notice and comment upon objects in their world. In other Source games, we could write explicit scenes for supporting characters to act out at certain points in the world, but...
The first version of this area didn't have any openings on the walls at all. Everything was closed off. We decided that since we were so high up in the hospital and there wasn't any real geometry below, that we could add windows and use 3D skybox to provide this great vista. Once we put windows in, sometimes the hunter attack would...
Given all the rooftop in the game, we saw Survivor falling off a lot, and it wasn't much fun. Player would make it all the way up here, heading for a checkpoint, and then a zombie would come around the corner, and they'd back right off the edge of the building and fall. We wanted to give them a second chance, and in the process encourage the cooperative type of gameplay we were aiming for. So we came up with the idea of having them grab the ledge and hang there until a teammate helped them. The nice thing about this feature is it also builds tension. As soon as you grab the ledge, the clock starts ticking. You watch your character go from hanging with 2 hands to dropping off to 1 hand till eventually he slips and falls. In the older version, you simply fall and that was it. It was over. So solving a problem consistent with our game design principle led to another opportunity to build team play and tension.
In playtests, people were often confused by certain events and elements in the game. The addition of musical cues helped distinguish these events and diminish player confusion. This was similar to the way that we experimented with distinct visual silhouettes in order to make our characters stand out in a chaotic environment. Audio silhouettes work on a preconscious level and are rarely perceived.
During our internal playtesting, we ran into situations where a player who had a habit of making bad decisions kept becoming incapacitated to the point where the other survivors became frustrated, continually reviving and escorting this player 5 or 6 times in the space of a couple of minutes. Adding the 3rd strike in your dead rule solved this issue 2 ways. First, it temporarily took these players out of the game and allowed the rest of the team to proceed and enjoy their experience. Second, the players who died found themselves as a spectator watching the more successful players. This not only gave them the opportunity to learn how the remaining players were surviving, but how they might improve their own performance as well. It also let them cool off and regain their composure in preparation for
Players need to learn from their mistakes as quickly as possible. In early versions of Left 4 Dead, if survivors failed a campaign at any point, we just put them right back at the beginning and made them play the whole thing over again. That meant that if the team dies in the last level, it'll be close to 45 minutes before they ever get back to that map to try something new. This made it hard for players to remember exactly what they'd done wrong, and so it was hard for them to decide what they might want to do differently. So now, when a team goes...
All the music in Left 4 Dead, themes, motifs, hits, and effects, are based on a hybrid scale derived from the main opening menu theme. This theme, representing the near death of humanity as it fades to a distance only to be accessed through a radio, is an incremental melodic modulation, collecting up all the notes used along the way. The scale is not absolute, and some notes outside the scale are used occasionally to achieve even greater dissonance. But by using the singular and very chromatic scale, almost any piece written in it will generally dovetail pretty decently with any.
When players are moving through the world in a panic and trying to coordinate with their team, the last thing you want them to worry about is which key lets them crouch so they can scramble into a vent. Throughout the game, we tried to simplify movement controls so the players could enjoy the terror of the experience with as little frustration as possible. Here,
the hospital rooftop is the finale that saw the most iterations. It's the first one that we ever built. The initial design had the survivor.
Left 4 Dead was originally going to have a continuous story that started with the hospital campaign. When the chopper pilot picked you up, he would start talking about how he had just done a street pickup and wasn't feeling so well. Clearly he had just been infected and the chopper was about to go down. We found that this left playtesters feeling let down, instead of rewarded for having survived the challenging campaign. We decided to cut that section of the pilot's dialogue and kept the ending upbeat, reinforcing the player's sense of accomplishment.
The tank is an awesome presence on the battlefield. It's the only zombie that can withstand any amount of direct fire. To successfully combat a tank, the survivors need to work together and focus on their target, and even then the chance of catastrophe is high. With all of this power, it's a huge reward when a player gets to play the tank.
Highly cooperative and experienced survivor team.
While special effects seem on the surface to be visual fluff, they also serve critical gameplay functions.
In early playtests, when players controlled the tank, we had a major problem with them not behaving in character, totally breaking the game balance of the tank and making him a game ender almost every time. The problem was that an intelligent human player wants to win right now, and the tank was designed to enrage.
Early in the design of this rooftop,
because Left 4 Dead is designed to be played over and over again, we made the dialogue scenes have as many variants as we could cram in. For instance, the encounter with the crazy church guy halfway through the Death Toll campaign includes more than 130 lines spread across 5 characters that can play out about 25 different ways. Variations.
we knew we wanted homemade weaponry for Left 4 Dead, and a pipe bomb seemed ideal.
While there are hundreds of infected types mobbing the player in Left 4 Dead, there are only 4 survivors. To make sure these 4...
Because teamwork is so important to gameplay in Left 4 Dead, we wanted to give players feedback on how they and their teammates were working as a team. The first version of this was something we called awards, which is basically a large collection of positive and negative player action.
From the start, focusing.
Traditional vignetting is a term from photography which refers to the slight darkening of the periphery of a photograph. In our vignetting approach, we darken only the top edge and corners. This focuses player attention down into the middle of the play space where it belongs, while also creating a sense of oppression or claustrophobia. This is a great example of how a visual enhancement can have a positive effect on the overall game experience as well.
Я думаю, это последний комментарий был. Больше ничего нету.
Сюда, ко мне.
Теперь вам нужно лишь продержаться до моего прибытия. Но сначала подготовьтесь. Стационарная пушка с боеприпасами. Это поможет вам отбиться. Я не смогу поделиться, если вы не...
Здесь аптечка.
Когда будете готовы, вызывайте. Вертолет новостей.
И чё? И чё, это все, что ли? Ну-ка. Короче, это походу все на этом. Походу на этом все. Как бы. Радио не вызывается, ничего нету. вряд ли это из-за того, что мне надо всех убить, как бы вот этих вот. Это очень вряд ли. Ну вот и все. Ну тут вот по периметру, как бы, я вроде уже всех вальнул. Типа именно сверху. А снизу по этим бокам я только что сейчас прошелся. Тоже всех завалил. Я думаю, это все. Так бы. Никого, ничего нету. Как бы я всех убил. О, блин. Ой, ём. Нифига себе.
Идём, держись, я тебя вылечу.
Огромное спасибо.
Ну все, короче, тут ничего нету. Главное меню. Вот. Все получается. На этом с Left 4 Dead закончено. Я еще эти ачивки поубиваю, которые остались сам. Блин, 11 тысяч. А у меня сколько было? Там ж вроде, ну, ачивки не должны засчитываться в комментариях, но мне кажется, что у меня было 10 тысяч, а тут 11. Или это у меня уже глюки. Но я просто перед началом стрима не проверял. Вот. Ну ладно. На этом с Left 4 Dead мы заканчиваем. Следующая игра... Ну, не будем Left 4 Dead сразу второй проходить. Я хочу от этой игры, в принципе, отдохнуть немного. Вот. Left 4 Dead не знаю, когда начнем, когда будет настроение. Следующая игра на прохождение у меня вроде бы... Сейчас, 5 сек буквально. Так, следующая игра на прохождение у меня вроде бы, насколько я помню, это Чейзер. Вот. Потом после Чейзера у нас 13, классик, и потом, если я смогу где-то найти, не знаю, Lost Identity, 13 Lost Identity, посмотрим, и 13 ремейк. Вот. И потом уже 0304 игра тоже такая. А там посмотрим. Кстати, я вот недавно установил более новую версию BlueStacks, и у меня на этот BlueStacks, на более новый, уже скачивается как бы Hello Neighbor Nikki's Diaries. Поэтому попробуем, может быть, его тоже пройти. Хотя я смотрел, то что там вроде бы надо главы докупать все равно, а в Play Market фиг ты сейчас купишь что-нибудь. Вот, но попробуем, я думаю. Ну и потом, когда мы это все пройдем, останется у нас Left 4 Dead 2 и Payday 2. Но Payday 2 я еще не все дополнения купил. Мне спасибо, что донатит. Донатили только 200 рублей. Вот. Остальное все я сам покупаю на свои шиши. Вот. Ну, живем. Ну, не знаю, Payday 2 я вряд ли успею за, типа, докупить эти дополнения. Как бы, я думаю, мы эти игры быстренько пройдем. То есть сейчас я еще и неделю, как бы, каждый день стримы будут. И я думаю, не по 2 часа, как бы нормально так. Ну, не знаю. Будем смотреть. Либо Left 4 Dead, может, 2 начнем. Payday 2, я говорю, вряд ли я успею докупить все DLC. Вот. Может быть, я буду какую-нибудь другую игру куплю. В Стиме. Либо я еще подумываю вот ключ для метро 2033 и Last Light купить. Вот. И перепройти их на канал. Метро 2033 у меня, во-первых, недопройдено. А Last Light просто перепройдем как бы для канала. Вот. Уже с микрофоном. Ну и Exodus тоже Enhanced Edition. Тоже перепройдем. Но я не знаю, как я посмотрю характеристики, потому что у меня обычный Exodus со стримом, я помню, лагал еще там 2 года назад, когда я проходил. 2,5, наверное, даже. Вот. Ну, под запись она у меня лагала немножко. А Enhanced Edition тем более, я думаю. Ну, я посмотрю системные требования, как она будет себя вообще вести. Вот, так что посмотрим. Ну, а на этом с Left 4 Dead мы и заканчиваем, прощаемся. Вот. Всем спасибо, кто мне там, может, что-то помогал проходить в нем. Вот. Давайте титры. Только я немножечко не понимаю, что тут у нас да как с этими титрами. Они какие-то баганые. Сейчас 5 сек. Ладно. Короче. Короче, как-то вот так вот. Ладно. Теперь точно все. Всем спасибо за просмотр. Подписывайтесь на канал, оценивайте видео, пишите в комментариях свои предложения, советы. Добавляйтесь, друзья, в Steam, подписывайтесь на Twitch. И всем удачи, всем пока.